The wagon lurched to a stop at the edge of town, and Georgia Monroe felt rough hands seize her arms before she could even comprehend what was happening. Her husband's face, twisted with rage and disgust, appeared in the canvas opening as two men dragged her down onto the dusty ground of Yankton, South Dakota, her swollen belly making her movements awkward and painful. "You will never set foot in this town again," William spat, his voice carrying across the evening air. "That bastard child you carry is not mine, and I will not raise another man's spawn." Georgia's heart pounded as she struggled to her feet, dust coating her worn calico dress. "William, please, I have done nothing wrong. The child is yours. I swear it on my life." But her husband had already climbed back into the wagon, snapping the reins with such force that the horses bolted forward. Georgia reached out, her fingers grasping at nothing but air as the wagon rolled away. Other townspeople emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion, but their faces held no sympathy. Whispers spread like wildfire through the small Dakota town, and doors began to close one by one. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the main street. Georgia stood alone, her small bundle of belongings at her feet, feeling the weight of her 7-month pregnancy and the crushing reality that she had nowhere to go. She had no family in Yankton, no friends who would risk their reputations to shelter a woman accused of infidelity. The September wind carried a chill that made her shiver despite her shawl. She picked up her bundle with trembling hands and began walking toward the outskirts of town, each step heavier than the last. Tears streamed down her face, but she refused to sob aloud. She would not give the watching townspeople that satisfaction. Behind her, she could hear the murmur of voices, the judgment in their tones clear even if she could not make out the words. The road stretched before her, leading into open prairie land where the grass grew tall and golden in the fading light. Georgia had no plan, no destination. She only knew she had to keep moving, had to find shelter before darkness fell completely. Her back ached, and the baby kicked inside her as if protesting the sudden upheaval. She had walked perhaps 2 miles when the sound of hoofbeats made her turn. A lone rider approached on a paint horse, his silhouette dark against the dimming sky. Georgia's first instinct was fear. Out here, alone and vulnerable, she was easy prey for any man with ill intentions. She clutched her bundle tighter and kept walking, hoping the rider would pass her by, but the horse slowed as it drew near, and a deep voice called out, "Madam, you should not be out here alone." Night comes fast on the prairie. Georgia glanced up at the rider. He was young, perhaps 25 years old, with dark hair that touched his collar beneath a well-worn hat. His face was tanned from long days in the sun, and his eyes held a concern that seemed genuine. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, chaps over denim trousers, a leather vest over a faded blue shirt, and a bandana tied around his neck. "I have nowhere else to go," Georgia replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She hated the weakness she heard in her own words, but exhaustion and despair had stripped away her pride. The cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion, landing lightly on his boots. "Zachary Hale," he said, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. "I was in town getting supplies when I saw what happened. That was no way to treat a woman, especially one in your condition." Georgia felt fresh tears spring to her eyes at the simple kindness in his voice. "Georgia Monroe," she managed to say, "or I was. I do not know what my name is anymore." Zachary looked back toward Yankton, then at the darkening prairie ahead. "I have a ranch about 5 miles west of here. It is not much, just a cabin and some grazing land for my cattle, but you are welcome to shelter there tonight. You should not be out here alone." Every instinct warned Georgia to be cautious. She did not know this man, could not trust his intentions. But what choice did she have? The temperature was dropping, and she had no tent, no bedroll, nothing but the thin blanket in her bundle. If she refused his offer, she might not survive the night. "I do not want charity," she said, lifting her chin despite her desperate circumstances. "And I will not be your whore in exchange for a roof over my head." Zachary's expression did not change, though she saw a flicker of something, perhaps respect, in his eyes. "I am not asking you to be either. You need help and I am offering it freely. No strings attached, Mrs. Monroe." The way he said Mrs. Monroe with such firmness, acknowledging her married status despite what had just happened, made something crack in Georgia's chest. She nodded once, not trusting herself to speak. Zachary helped her mount his horse, handling her gently as if she were made of glass. He swung up behind her, careful not to press too close, and clicked his tongue to set the horse moving at an easy walk. Georgia sat stiffly in front of him, acutely aware of his presence, of the strength in the arm that reached around her to hold the reins. They rode in silence as night settled over the prairie. Stars began to appear overhead, countless and brilliant in the vast Dakota sky. The air grew colder and Georgia could not suppress a shiver. Without a word, Zachary shrugged out of his jacket and draped it around her shoulders. It smelled of leather and wood smoke and horses, and the warmth of it brought fresh tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "No need for thanks," Zachary replied. "Any decent man would do the same." But Georgia knew that was not true. She had seen the faces of the townspeople, the men who had looked away as her husband cast her out. Zachary Hale was different, and she wondered why. What would make a young cowboy risk his reputation by sheltering a woman accused of adultery? The cabin appeared as a dark shape against the starlit prairie, small but solid-looking. As they drew closer, Georgia could make out more details. It was built of hewn logs with a stone chimney, a covered porch along the front, and a barn set back about 50 yards. Corrals held shapes that moved in the darkness, cattle settling for the night. Zachary dismounted first, then helped Georgia down with careful hands. Her legs nearly buckled after the ride, stiff from walking and the strain of her pregnancy. He steadied her with a hand on her elbow until she found her balance. "Let me get you inside and start a fire," he said, guiding her toward the cabin. "You must be frozen through." The interior of the cabin was simple but clean. One large room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A doorway led to what Georgia assumed was a bedroom. The furniture was handmade but sturdy. A table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair near the fireplace, shelves holding provisions and cooking equipment. Zachary moved efficiently, lighting a lamp and then building a fire in the fireplace. The flames caught quickly, casting dancing light and warmth into the room. Georgia sank into the rocking chair, suddenly too exhausted to remain standing. She watched Zachary work, noting the competence in his movements, the way his hands knew exactly what to do. "Are you hungry?" he asked once the fire was blazing. "I have salt pork and beans, some biscuits from this morning. Nothing fancy, but it is filling." Georgia realized she was ravenous. She had not eaten since breakfast, and that had been only a small bowl of porridge. "Yes, please. Anything would be wonderful." While Zachary prepared the food, Georgia looked around the cabin more carefully. It was the home of a man living alone, that much was clear, but it was not the slovenly bachelor's quarters she might have expected. Everything was in its place, the floor swept clean, dishes washed and stacked neatly. A few books sat on a shelf near the fireplace, and she was surprised to see titles she recognized. Shakespeare, Dickens, a volume of Wordsworth's poetry. "You read," she said, not quite making it a question. Zachary glanced over his shoulder from where he stood at the stove. My mother was a schoolteacher back in Missouri. She made sure I could read and write before she died. The books were hers. There was a weight to his words, a grief carefully controlled. Georgia understood that kind of loss. Her own mother had died when she was 16, leaving her to manage her father's household until she married William 3 years ago. That seemed like a lifetime ago now. Zachary brought 2 plates to the table and gestured for Georgia to join him. She rose from the rocking chair, moving slowly, and sat across from him. The food was simple but well prepared, and she ate with an appetite that might have embarrassed her under other circumstances. Zachary ate quietly, not staring at her, giving her the dignity of privacy even in the close quarters. "Why did you help me?" Georgia asked finally, setting down her fork. "You do not know me. For all you know, the accusations against me are true." Zachary met her eyes across the table. "Are they?" "No," Georgia said firmly. "I have never been unfaithful to my husband, not in deed or even in thought, but he chose not to believe me." "Then that is his failing, not yours," Zachary said. "I helped you because it was the right thing to do. My mother raised me to respect women, to protect those who cannot protect themselves. What your husband did was cowardly and cruel. A real man would stand by his wife, not cast her out to die." The conviction in his voice stirred something in George's chest. She had spent 3 years married to a man who had grown increasingly cold and controlling, who spoke to her as if she were a burden rather than a partner. Hearing this stranger speak of respect and protection with such sincerity made her realize how starved she had been for basic human decency. "You can have the bedroom," Zachary continued. "I will sleep out here by the fire. In the morning we can figure out what comes next." Georgia wanted to protest, to say she could not take his bed, but exhaustion overwhelmed her. She nodded gratefully and rose from the table. Zachary showed her to the bedroom, bringing in her bundle and the lamp. The room held a simple bed with a thick quilt, a dresser, and a washstand with a basin and pitcher. "There is water in the pitcher if you want to wash," Zachary said from the doorway. "Sleep as late as you need." "I will be up early to tend the cattle, but I will be quiet." "Mr. Hale," Georgia began, but he shook his head. "Zachary," he said. "Just Zachary." "Zachary," she repeated. "Thank you. I do not know how I will ever repay your kindness." "No repayment necessary," he replied. "Good night, Georgia." He closed the door gently, and Georgia was alone for the first time since her world had shattered. She sank onto the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to cry, great racking sobs that shook her whole body. She cried for the loss of her marriage, for the betrayal of her husband, for the fear of bringing a child into the world with no father and no home. But beneath the grief, a tiny spark of hope had kindled. Zachary Hale had shown her kindness when she had expected none. Perhaps there was still goodness in the world after all. She washed her face in the basin, changed into her nightgown, and climbed beneath the quilt. The bed was comfortable, the quilt heavy and warm. Through the closed door, she could hear the soft sounds of Zachary moving around the main room, settling for the night. Despite everything, despite the terror and uncertainty of her situation, Georgia felt safe. She closed her eyes and, against all odds, fell into a deep sleep. Morning light filtered through the small window when Georgia woke. For a moment, she was disoriented, not recognizing her surroundings. Then memory crashed back, and with it, the weight of her new reality. She sat up slowly, her body stiff and aching. The baby stirred inside her, a rolling sensation that had become familiar over the past months. Georgia dressed in her other calico dress, this one a faded blue that had seen better days. She braided her dark blonde hair, pinning it up as best she could without a proper mirror. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found the cabin empty. Through the window, she could see Zachary in the corral, working with the cattle. The fire had been banked but not extinguished, keeping the cabin warm. On the table sat a plate covered with a cloth, and when Georgia lifted it, she found biscuits and bacon, still slightly warm. The simple gesture brought tears to her eyes again. She seemed to cry at everything now, emotions raw and close to the surface. She sat and ate slowly, watching Zachary through the window. He moved with the confidence of a man comfortable in his work, guiding cattle from one pen to another, checking their condition. Even from this distance, she could see he treated the animals with care. After eating, Georgia cleaned the dishes, needing to do something useful. She found everything she needed, the kitchen organized in a logical way. She had just finished drying the last plate when the cabin door opened and Zachary entered, stamping dust from his boots. "You are up," he said, removing his hat. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I expected," Georgia admitted. "Thank you for breakfast." "It was nothing," Zachary said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. He poured himself coffee from the pot on the stove, then gestured with the cup. "Would you like some, please?" They sat at the table with their coffee, and Georgia felt the weight of unspoken questions hanging between them. Zachary did not push, simply waited, giving her time to gather her thoughts. "I cannot stay here indefinitely," Georgia said finally. "It would ruin your reputation, and I have already caused enough trouble." "You have not caused anything," Zachary corrected. "As for my reputation, I do not have much of one to ruin. I keep to myself mostly, work my land, tend my cattle. People in Yankton know me as an honest dealer, and that is enough. But a pregnant woman staying in your home, people will talk." "Let them talk," Zachary said with a shrug. "I know the truth, and so do you. That is all that matters." Georgia studied him over the rim of her coffee cup. He was a handsome man, she realized, though his features were more rugged than refined. His jaw was strong, his eyes a warm brown that seemed to see more than most people's. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet strength that made her feel safe in a way she had not felt in years. "Why do you live alone out here?" she asked. "You must be, what, 25? Most men your age are married with families by now." A shadow crossed Zachary's face. "I was engaged once 3 years ago. Mary was her name. She died of fever 2 weeks before our wedding. After that, I could not stay in Missouri, could not bear the memories. I came west, bought this land, and started over." "I am sorry," Georgia said softly. "I know what it is to lose someone you love." "Your husband is still alive," Zachary pointed out. "The man I thought I married never existed," Georgia replied. "William courted me with poetry and promises. He spoke of building a life together, of partnership and respect. But after the wedding, he changed. Or perhaps I simply saw his true nature for the first time. He was controlling, suspicious, always questioning where I had been and who I had spoken to. When I became pregnant, he insisted the child could not be his, though I had never so much as looked at another man. I think he wanted an excuse to be rid of me." Zachary's jaw tightened. "He is a fool." "And a coward." "Perhaps," Georgia said, "but that does not change my situation. I have a child coming in less than 2 months. I need to find work, somewhere to live, some way to support myself and my baby." "You could stay here," Zachary said quietly. Georgia's heart skipped a beat. "I cannot ask that of you." "You are not asking, I am offering." Zachary leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Look, I know this is sudden, we are strangers, but you need help and I have the means to provide it. This cabin has 2 rooms, you can have the bedroom and I will sleep out here. There is plenty of work to be done, more than one man can handle alone. You could help with the cooking, the garden, mending. Nothing strenuous, nothing that would endanger the baby. And when the child comes, you will have a safe place to recover. What would you ask in return?" Georgia asked, needing to understand his motivations. Men do not help women for nothing. I ask only what I have already said. Help with the household tasks when you are able. Company, perhaps, during the long evenings. It gets lonely out here. Zachary met her eyes steadily. I will not lay a hand on you, Georgia. You have my word on that. You are a married woman, and even if you were not, I would never take advantage of someone in your situation. All I offer is shelter and protection. Your baby will have my protection, and so will you, for as long as you need it. The words hung in the air between them, a vow spoken with such sincerity that Georgia felt something shift inside her chest. She searched Zachary's face for any sign of deception, any hint of ulterior motives, but found only honest concern. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this for us?" Zachary looked down at his coffee cup, turning it slowly in his hands. "When Mary died, I thought my life was over. I came out here to the prairie thinking I would just work until I dropped, that I would never feel anything again. And for 3 years, that is exactly what I did. I existed, but I did not live. Then yesterday, I saw you standing alone in the road with night falling, carrying a child and cast out by everyone who should have protected you. And I thought, if I turn away now, if I let you face this alone when I have the means to help, then I am no better than those townspeople who closed their doors. Maybe this is God's way of reminding me that there is still good I can do in this world." Tears rolled down Georgia's cheeks, and she did not bother to wipe them away. "I accept," she said. "Thank you, Zachary, thank you." Relief flickered across his face, and he reached across the table to squeeze her hand briefly before pulling back. "Then it is settled. We will make this work, Georgia. I promise you that." The days that followed fell into a rhythm that surprised Georgia with its comfort. She rose each morning to find Zachary already up and working, but he always left coffee warming on the stove and something for her breakfast. She would eat, then set about cleaning the cabin and preparing the midday meal. The work was familiar, the tasks of running a household ones she had done for years, first for her father and then for William. But here in Zachary's cabin, the work felt different. When she swept the floors, or mended his shirts, or prepared stew for supper, it felt like contribution rather than obligation. Zachary always thanked her, noticed the small improvements she made. When she found wildflowers growing near the creek and brought them inside in a jar, he commented on how they brightened the room. When she reorganized the pantry to make better use of the space, he praised her efficiency. They talked during meals, slowly learning about each other. Zachary told her about growing up in Missouri, about his father who had died in the war when Zachary was just a boy, about his mother who had worked herself to exhaustion teaching school to support them. Georgia spoke of her own childhood, of her mother's gentle nature and her father's strictness, of her dreams of having a family of her own. They did not speak of William or Mary, an unspoken agreement to leave the painful past behind them. Instead, they talked of smaller things, books they had read, places they hoped to see someday, the changing weather as September gave way to October. Georgia discovered that Zachary had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he was comfortable, that he loved thunderstorms and hated early mornings despite being up before dawn every day. Zachary learned that Georgia could quote long passages of poetry from memory, that she had a talent for drawing though she had not picked up a pencil in years, that she sang softly to herself while she worked. As the days passed, Georgia felt her body changing, preparing for the birth. The baby seemed to grow heavier, pressing down in a way that made walking uncomfortable. Her back ached constantly, and her ankles swelled. Zachary noticed everything, adjusting his expectations of what she could do. He brought in extra water without being asked, chopped wood for the fire so she would not have to carry heavy loads, took over the heavier household tasks without making her feel inadequate. One evening in late October, as they sat by the fire after supper, Georgia felt the baby kick particularly hard. She gasped, pressing a hand to her side, and Zachary was on his feet immediately. "What is wrong? Are you in pain?" "No, no," Georgia said quickly. "The baby just kicked very hard. It startled me." Zachary sat back down, relief evident on his face. "Is that normal?" "Yes," Georgia said with a small smile. "The baby is very active lately. I think we will have a strong child." "May I?" Zachary asked hesitantly, gesturing toward her belly. Georgia's breath caught. It was an intimate request, crossing a line they had both been careful to maintain. But there was such wonder in Zachary's eyes, such genuine interest, that she found herself nodding. Zachary knelt beside her chair and placed his hand gently on the side of her belly where she had been holding hers. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the baby kicked again, and Georgia saw Zachary's eyes widen. "I felt it," he breathed. "That is amazing." "A life growing," Georgia said softly. "A miracle despite everything." Zachary looked up at her, his hand still resting on her belly. "This child will be loved, Georgia. I swear it. No matter what anyone says, no matter what difficulties come, this baby will be protected and cherished." The intensity in his voice, the certainty of his promise, made Georgia's heart ache. She reached down and covered his hand with hers, holding it against her belly. They stayed like that for a long moment, connected by the life growing between them, and Georgia felt something shift inside her chest. It was too soon, too complicated, but she could not deny the growing warmth she felt for this man who had saved her. Winter arrived early that year, sweeping across the Dakota prairie with fierce winds and bitter cold. Zachary worked hard to prepare, sealing gaps in the cabin walls, stacking extra firewood, making sure they had sufficient provisions to last through the worst of the season. Georgia helped as much as she could, but her pregnancy was advanced now, making movement difficult. "The baby will come soon," she told Zachary one evening in mid-November. "Perhaps 2 or 3 weeks, no more." Zachary looked up from the harness he was mending, concern clear on his face. "Should I fetch the doctor from town, or a midwife?" Georgia shook her head. "The doctor will not come for me, not after what happened, and I do not know of any midwives nearby. My mother taught me what to expect. I helped her with several births when I was younger. I know what to do." "You cannot deliver your own baby," Zachary protested. "Women have been doing it for centuries," Georgia replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "But I would be grateful if you would stay close when the time comes, in case I need help." "I will be here," Zachary promised. "I will not leave you to face this alone." The first snow fell 3 days later, thick flakes that covered the prairie in white. Georgia stood at the window, watching the world transform, and felt the baby shift inside her. "Soon," she thought, "soon you will be here, little one. And we will be safe, thanks to this good man who asked nothing in return for his kindness." She turned from the window to find Zachary watching her, his expression unreadable. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That you are beautiful," he said quietly. "That I am grateful you are here." Georgia's breath caught. They had been careful not to acknowledge the growing attraction between them, the way their eyes met and held for moments too long, the way they found excuses to be near each other. But Zachary's words brought everything into the open. "I am still married," Georgia said, though her heart raced. "Even though William cast me out in the eyes of the law and the church, I am still his wife." "I know," Zachary said, "and I respect that, but I cannot help what I feel, Georgia. These past weeks, getting to know you, watching your strength and grace despite everything you have endured, I have come to care for you, deeply." Georgia crossed the room slowly, her hand pressed to the small of her aching back. She stopped in front of Zachary, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "I care for you too," she admitted. "More than I should, more than I have any right to." "Then we will wait," Zachary said, reaching up to cup her face gently. "When the baby comes, when you have recovered, we will find a way to dissolve your marriage. William abandoned you. That must count for something legally. And when you are free, truly free, I would like to court you properly, if you will have me." "I would like that," Georgia whispered. "Very much." Zachary leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead, a chaste kiss that nonetheless sent warmth flooding through Georgia's body. "Until then," he said, "I am your friend and protector. Nothing more." "Nothing more," Georgia agreed, though they both knew it was a comfortable lie. They were already so much more than that. The pains began in the early hours of a December morning, waking Georgia from a restless sleep. She lay still for a moment, breathing through the cramping sensation, trying to determine if this was truly labor or another false alarm. But when the pain came again 15 minutes later, stronger this time, she knew. The baby was coming. She rose carefully and made her way to the main room. Zachary was already awake, stoking the fire, and he turned at the sound of her footsteps. One look at her face told him everything. "It is time," he asked. Georgia nodded. "The pains are still far apart, but they are getting stronger. It will be today, I think." Zachary's hands shook as he helped her settle into the rocking chair by the fire. He had faced cattle stampedes and harsh blizzards without flinching, but the thought of Georgia giving birth terrified him. "What do you need? Tell me what to do." "Boil water," Georgia said, breathing through another contraction. "Lots of it. And bring clean linens from the chest in the bedroom. We will need to prepare a place for the baby." Zachary moved quickly, following her instructions with single-minded focus. He filled every pot they owned with water and set them on the stove to heat. He brought armfuls of linens, blankets, anything soft they could use. Georgia directed him to prepare a pallet near the fireplace where she could lie down when the time came. The labor progressed slowly through the morning and into the afternoon. The contractions grew stronger and closer together, and Georgia paced the cabin between them, trying to ease the discomfort. Zachary stayed close, offering her his arm when she needed support, bringing her water when she was thirsty, wiping her face with a cool cloth when she grew overheated despite the winter cold outside. "You are doing so well," he murmured during a particularly strong contraction. "You are the bravest woman I have ever known." Georgia could not speak through the pain, but she gripped his hand tightly, drawing strength from his presence. When the contraction passed, she looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "I am frightened," she admitted. "What if something goes wrong?" "What if I cannot do this?" "You can," Zachary said firmly. "You are strong, Georgia, stronger than you know, and I am right here with you. You are not alone." As evening approached, the contractions became intense, coming one on top of another with barely any rest between. Georgia labored on the pallet Zachary had prepared, her nightgown soaked with sweat, her hair plastered to her face. She pushed when her body demanded it, crying out with the effort, and Zachary knelt beside her, holding her hand, whispering encouragement. "I can see the head," he said, his voice filled with awe. "Georgia, the baby is coming, just a little more." Georgia bore down with everything she had, feeling her body stretch and tear, and then suddenly there was release. The pressure was gone, and a thin, wailing cry filled the cabin. Georgia collapsed back against the pillows, gasping, and watched through blurred vision as Zachary lifted a tiny, squirming infant. "A boy," Zachary said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have a beautiful baby boy." He wrapped the baby in a clean blanket and placed him in Georgia's arms. She looked down at her son, at his scrunched-up face and tiny fists, and felt a wave of love so powerful it took her breath away. The baby had a dusting of dark hair and was already nuzzling against her, seeking milk. "Hello, little one," Georgia whispered. "I am your mama. And this is Zachary, the man who saved us both." Zachary helped Georgia through the afterbirth, cleaned everything up with a competence that surprised her, and then brought fresh linens to make her comfortable. He moved around the cabin quietly, giving her privacy as she attempted to nurse the baby for the first time. When he returned, he brought her water and bread with honey. "Thank you," Georgia said, meaning it for so much more than the food. "I could not have done this without you." "You could have," Zachary replied, "but I am glad I was here to help." He looked at the baby in her arms, wonder clear on his face. "Have you thought of a name?" Georgia had considered many names over the months, but looking at her son now, only one seemed right. "Samuel," she said. "It means God has heard, and he did hear my prayers even when I thought I was alone. He sent you to us." "Samuel," Zachary repeated softly. He reached out and gently touched the baby's small hand. Samuel's fingers closed reflexively around Zachary's thumb, and Georgia saw tears shine in Zachary's eyes. "Welcome to the world, Samuel. Your mama and I are going to take good care of you." The first weeks with a newborn were exhausting. Samuel needed to nurse frequently, day and night, and Georgia barely slept. Her body ached from the birth, and she moved slowly, healing gradually. Zachary took over all the household tasks, cooking meals, cleaning, tending the cattle, and caring for both Georgia and the baby with tireless devotion. He fashioned a cradle from an old wooden crate, sanding it smooth and lining it with soft blankets. He carved a rattle from a piece of wood, spending hours by lamplight to make sure there were no splinters. He walked the cabin floor with Samuel when the baby cried at night, giving Georgia precious minutes of rest, singing old songs in a soft baritone. Georgia watched him with growing amazement. Zachary had no obligation to this child, no blood connection, yet he cared for Samuel as if he were his own son. He changed soiled diapers without complaint, bathed the baby with gentle hands, spoke to him constantly as if Samuel could understand every word. "You are going to be strong and smart," Zachary would murmur to the baby. "Your mama is the bravest person I know, and you will grow up knowing you are loved. That is what matters, Samuel, not who your father was, but who you choose to become." One evening in late December, Georgia woke from a nap to find Zachary sitting in the rocking chair by the fire, Samuel cradled in his arms. Zachary was reading aloud from one of his books, his voice low and soothing, and the baby stared up at him with wide, unfocused eyes. "He likes your voice," Georgia said softly, not wanting to disturb the peaceful scene. Zachary looked up with a smile. "I like talking to him. I know he does not understand yet, but maybe hearing words will help him learn to speak sooner." Georgia rose slowly, still tender from the birth, and joined them by the fire. She sat in the other chair and watched her son in Zachary's arms. "You are wonderful with him," she said, "better than many fathers I have known." "I love him," Zachary said simply. "Is that strange?" "I know he is not mine by blood, but I have loved him from the moment he drew his first breath. And I love his mother, though I have no right to say so." "You have every right," Georgia replied, her heart full. "Zachary, you have been more of a husband to me in these past months than William ever was. You have protected me, cared for me, asked nothing in return. How could I not love you?" Zachary's eyes met hers across the firelight. "We must do this properly," he said. "You are still legally married. We need to find a lawyer, file for divorce on grounds of abandonment. It may take time." "Then we will wait," Georgia said. "We have time now. We are safe here, Samuel and I, thanks to you." Christmas came quietly to the prairie cabin. Zachary surprised Georgia by producing small gifts. A warm shawl he had ordered from Yankton months earlier, soft wool socks for the cold winter, a new dress in deep blue that fit her changing figure. Georgia had made him a warm scarf, using yarn she had carefully unraveled from an old sweater and reknit, and a shirt from fabric she had found in the storage chest. They celebrated with a special meal, roasted chicken and potatoes, dried apple pie that Georgia had learned to make from Zachary's mother's recipe book. Samuel slept through most of the day, his tiny presence making the cabin feel more like a home than ever before. "This is the best Christmas I have had in years," Zachary said as they sat by the fire after supper. "Having you both here, it feels right. It feels like family." "It is family," Georgia said. "Maybe not in the traditional sense, not yet, but we are a family nonetheless." Zachary reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. They sat like that as the fire burned low, fingers intertwined, Samuel sleeping peacefully nearby, and the world outside cold and white with snow. Winter deepened, and the prairie became a frozen landscape of white and gray. Snow piled high around the cabin, and the wind howled like a living thing. Zachary worked tirelessly to keep them comfortable, breaking ice in the creek for water, feeding the cattle, maintaining the fire. On the worst days, when the blizzards raged, they stayed inside, and Georgia found herself grateful for the solid walls and Zachary's preparation. They passed the long evenings reading aloud to each other, playing simple games with cards, talking about everything and nothing. Samuel grew rapidly, filling out and becoming more alert. He began to smile, a toothless grin that made both Georgia and Zachary melt. The baby showed a clear preference for Zachary's deep voice, quieting immediately when Zachary spoke to him. "He knows you," Georgia said one evening, watching Zachary make faces at the baby. "He trusts you completely." "The feeling is mutual," Zachary replied, lifting Samuel and holding him up high. The baby gurgled with delight, and Zachary laughed, a sound that had become more common in recent weeks. "He is going to be tall, I think. Strong, too. Feel how he grips my fingers." Georgia watched them together, her heart so full it ached. She had never imagined this life when she stood alone on the road outside Yankton. She had expected hardship and struggle, had prepared herself for the worst. Instead, she had found safety and love in the most unexpected place. But reality intruded one February day when a rider appeared through the snow, making his way toward the cabin. Georgia saw him first from the window and felt her stomach drop with fear. Visitors were rare, and she could think of only bad reasons someone would brave the winter weather to come here. Zachary stepped outside to greet the rider, and Georgia strained to hear their conversation through the door. When Zachary came back inside, his expression was grim. "That was Tom Brennan from the neighboring ranch," he said. "There is news from town. Your husband has been spreading rumors, saying I kidnapped you, that I am holding you against your will. He is talking about bringing the law out here." Georgia's hands shook as she clutched Samuel closer. "That is absurd. You saved my life. I am here by choice." "I know that, and you know that, but William is making trouble. Tom came to warn me that the sheriff might be riding out soon to investigate." Zachary ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "This is my fault. I should have insisted you go into town and make a formal statement about what happened. Now it is your word against his." "Then we will tell the truth," Georgia said firmly. "I will tell anyone who asks that you have been nothing but honorable, that I am here willingly." "It might not be enough," Zachary said. "You are still his wife legally. He could demand you return, and the law might side with him." Fear coiled in George's chest. The thought of going back to William, of him having any claim over her or Samuel, was unbearable. "I will not go back to him," she said. "I would rather die." "You will not die, and you will not go back," Zachary said, his voice hard with determination. I promised to protect you and Samuel, and I meant it, but we need to be smart about this. We need legal help." The next morning, despite the snow and cold, Zachary rode into Yankton to find a lawyer. Georgia spent the day anxious and afraid, pacing the cabin with Samuel in her arms, jumping at every sound. When darkness fell and Zachary had not returned, she began to imagine the worst. Perhaps William had confronted him. Perhaps the townspeople had turned against him. Perhaps he had decided this was all too much trouble and would not come back. But near midnight, she heard hoofbeats, and Zachary came through the door, covered in snow and half frozen. Georgia wanted to throw her arms around him, but contented herself with helping him out of his wet clothes and wrapping him in blankets by the fire. "I found a lawyer," Zachary said through chattering teeth. "His name is Marcus Whitley. He practiced in Denver before moving to Yankton. He says we have a good case for divorce on grounds of abandonment and cruelty. But it will take time, maybe several months, to process through the courts." "And in the meantime," Georgia asked, "in the meantime, you need to make a formal statement to the sheriff about what happened. Whitley will come with us when we do that. And you need to be examined by a doctor who can testify that you were not harmed while staying here, that the baby is healthy and well cared for. We need to build a record that shows you are here by choice and that Samuel is thriving." It made sense, but the thought of going into town, of facing William and the people who had turned their backs on her, made Georgia feel sick. "I do not know if I can do it," she whispered. Zachary took her hands in his, warming them between his palms. "You are the strongest person I know," he said. "You survived betrayal, abandonment, and childbirth. You can survive this too, and I will be right beside you every step of the way." 2 days later, they made the journey into Yankton. It was the first time Georgia had been back since that terrible evening when William had cast her out. The town looked the same, but everything felt different. She held Samuel close, wrapped in layers of blankets, and sat stiff in the wagon seat beside Zachary. Marcus Whitley met them at his office, a small room above the general store. He was a man in his 50s with graying hair and kind eyes, and he treated Georgia with a respect she had not expected. "Mrs. Monroe," he said, shaking her hand, "Mr. Hale has told me your situation. I want to assure you that I will do everything in my power to help you gain your freedom. But I need you to tell me exactly what happened, in your own words, holding nothing back." Georgia recounted the story, starting with her marriage to William and the gradual deterioration of their relationship. She spoke of his accusations when she became pregnant, his growing violence toward her, and finally the day he had cast her out. She described Zachary finding her on the road and offering shelter, the birth of Samuel, the months of living peacefully on the ranch. Whitley took notes throughout, asking clarifying questions. When she finished, he sat back and studied her for a long moment. "Your husband will likely claim infidelity," he said bluntly. "The fact that you have been living with Mr. Hale will be used against you." "I have been faithful to my marriage vows," Georgia said firmly. "Zachary has never touched me inappropriately. We have not shared a bed." "I believe you," Whitley said, "but we will need to prove it. Are you willing to be examined by a doctor?" Georgia's face flushed, but she nodded. The doctor's examination was humiliating but necessary. Dr. Harrison, a stern-faced man who had practiced in Yankton for 20 years, conducted his examination with clinical efficiency. Afterward, he wrote a statement confirming that Georgia showed no signs of recent sexual activity and that the baby appeared to be the age she claimed. With the doctor's statement in hand, they went to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Cole was a weathered man in his 60s who had known law enforcement his whole life. He listened to Georgia's story, read the doctor's statement, and then sat back in his chair. Your husband has been in here twice demanding I arrest Mr. Hale for kidnapping, Cole said. But from what I am hearing, that is not what happened at all. No, sir, Georgia said. Zachary saved my life. I am here by my own free will. And the baby, my son Samuel. He is 3 months old and healthy, as the doctor confirmed. Cole looked at Zachary, who had remained silent throughout. You have not touched this woman. No, sir, Zachary replied. She sleeps in the bedroom. I sleep by the fire in the main room. I have treated her with nothing but respect. But you want to marry her, Cole said. It was not a question. Yes, sir, Zachary admitted. When she is free to marry again, I intend to ask for her hand. But not before. I am a patient man, Cole grunted. You are either the most honorable man I have ever met or the biggest fool, maybe both. He turned back to Georgia. I will note your statement in my records. If your husband causes trouble, I will refer him to Mr. Whitley here. But you should know, Mrs. Monroe, that this town does not look kindly on divorce. Whether or not you gain your freedom legally, you will face judgment. I have faced judgment already, Georgia said quietly. I can bear more of it if it means Samuel and I are safe. They left the sheriff's office and were preparing to return to the wagon when a familiar voice called out, Georgia. Georgia turned to see William striding across the street toward them. He looked thinner than she remembered, his face drawn and angry. Zachary immediately moved to stand between them, but Georgia touched his arm. It is all right, she said, though her heart pounded. Let him speak. William stopped a few feet away, his eyes flicking from Georgia to Zachary and back. So it is true, he said. You are living in sin with this cowboy. I am living under his protection, Georgia corrected, as you forced me to do when you abandoned me and your son. That baby is not my son, William spat. He is, Georgia said, but it does not matter anymore. I am filing for divorce, William. Our marriage is over. You cannot divorce me, William said. I have not given you grounds. Abandonment and cruelty are grounds enough, Marcus Whitley interjected, stepping forward. I am Mrs. Monroe's attorney, and I assure you we have a solid case. You may contest it if you wish, but you will lose. William's face flushed red with rage. This is your doing, he said to Zachary. You turned her against me. You did that yourself when you cast her out to die, Zachary replied evenly. I simply offered shelter to a woman and child in need. If that makes me guilty of something, then I will gladly bear that guilt. You will regret this, William said, but the threat rang hollow. He looked at Georgia one last time, and she saw something flicker in his eyes, regret, perhaps, or loss. But it was too little and too late. Goodbye, William, Georgia said. I hope you find whatever it is you are looking for. She turned away, and Zachary guided her back to the wagon. They rode out of Yankton in silence, Samuel sleeping peacefully between them. It was not until they were back on the open prairie that Georgia allowed herself to cry, releasing the tension and fear she had held through the entire ordeal. You were so brave, Zachary said, putting his arm around her shoulders and pulling her close. I am proud of you. I was terrified, Georgia admitted, but it is done now. We have started the process. We just have to wait. We are good at waiting, Zachary said with a small smile. We have had plenty of practice. The winter gradually released its grip on the prairie as February gave way to March. The snow began to melt, and the first green shoots appeared in sheltered spots. Samuel grew rapidly, becoming more interactive, laughing at Zachary's silly faces, grabbing at everything within reach. Georgia felt her body healing, felt her strength returning. The legal process moved slowly as Whitley had warned. Papers were filed, hearings scheduled and then postponed. William contested the divorce, as they had expected, claiming Georgia was an unfit mother who had abandoned her marriage. But the evidence was against him. Too many people had witnessed him casting Georgia out, and the doctor's examination proved she had been faithful. Through it all, Georgia and Zachary maintained their careful distance, sleeping in separate rooms, never allowing themselves more than brief touches. But the tension between them grew, the awareness that they were waiting for something just beyond reach. They spoke of the future in careful terms, planning for the day when Georgia would be free. "I want to expand the ranch," Zachary said one evening in early April as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Samuel slept in Georgia's arms, his small hand fisted in her dress. "Add another room to the cabin, maybe two. Build a proper barn. I have been saving money for years, and with two of us working the land, we could make something substantial." "I would like a garden," Georgia said. "A big one with vegetables and herbs, maybe some flowers too." "You can have whatever you want," Zachary said softly. He reached over and traced a finger down Samuel's soft cheek. "He deserves to grow up in a real home with both a mother and a father who love him." "He has that already," Georgia said. "You are his father in every way that matters, Zachary." Zachary looked at her, his eyes intense. "When this is over, when you are free, I am going to court you properly. I will bring you flowers and write you poetry and ask your permission before I even hold your hand." Georgia laughed softly. "You have already seen me at my worst, helped me give birth, changed Samuel's diapers. I think we might be past the formal courtship stage." "Maybe," Zachary agreed. "But you deserve romance, Georgia. You deserve to be treasured and cherished. I want to give you that." "You already have," Georgia said. "Every day in 100 small ways, but I will not object to flowers and poetry." The divorce was finally granted in late May. Marcus Whitley rode out to the ranch personally to deliver the news, a broad smile on his usually serious face. "The judge ruled in your favor," he told Georgia. "Your marriage to William Monroe is dissolved. You are a free woman." Georgia felt as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders, as if she could finally breathe fully for the first time in years. She thanked Whitley profusely, paid him his fee from the small amount of money she had been saving, and watched him ride away with tears of relief streaming down her face. Zachary found her on the porch, holding Samuel and crying. He sat beside her and pulled them both into his arms. "It is over," he murmured. "You are free." "We are free," Georgia corrected. "All three of us." That evening, after Samuel had been put to bed, Zachary took Georgia's hand and led her outside. The spring night was warm, stars brilliant overhead, and the prairie stretched out endlessly in all directions. He turned to face her, still holding her hand, his expression serious. "Georgia Monroe," he said formally, "I would be honored if you would allow me to court you with the intention of marriage. I promise to respect you, to cherish you, to be a good father to Samuel. I will work hard to provide for our family and to make you happy. What do you say?" Georgia felt laughter bubbling up inside her, joyous and free. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Zachary Hale, I will let you court me, though I should warn you I have every intention of saying yes when you eventually propose." "Is that so?" Zachary asked, his eyes sparkling with mirth. "It is," Georgia confirmed. "I love you. I have loved you for months, perhaps from the moment you offered to share your home with a stranger. You are the best man I have ever known." "And I love you," Zachary said. He cupped her face in his hands, tilting it up toward his. "May I kiss you?" "Please," Georgia whispered. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer. But it quickly deepened, months of restrained longing pouring out. Zachary pulled Georgia closer, and she melted against him, feeling the strength of his body, the warmth of his arms around her. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I have wanted to do that for so long," Zachary admitted. "So have I," Georgia said, "but it was worth the wait." They stood together under the stars, holding each other, and Georgia marveled at how her life had changed. A year ago, she had been trapped in a loveless marriage, pregnant and afraid. Now she was free, loved, standing in the arms of a man who had proven his devotion through actions rather than empty words. Zachary courted Georgia with the sweetness and attention she had always dreamed of. He picked wildflowers and left them on her pillow. He wrote her letters even though they lived in the same house, leaving them where she would find them, declaring his love in carefully chosen words. He asked her permission before touching her, treated her with a reverence that made her feel precious. But he also made her laugh with his dry humor and willingness to be silly. He played with Samuel for hours, building towers of blocks for the baby to knock down, making up stories about the animals they saw on the prairie. He taught Georgia to ride his horse, patient with her nervousness, celebrating when she finally managed a full circuit of the corral on her own. They talked late into the night about their hopes and dreams, making plans for the future. Georgia wanted more children, and Zachary agreed enthusiastically. He wanted to teach Samuel to ride and rope and work cattle. She wanted to teach him to read and appreciate poetry. They wanted to build something lasting, a legacy for their children and grandchildren. In June, Zachary proposed officially. He took Georgia on a picnic to a beautiful spot by the creek where cottonwoods grew in a thick grove. He had packed a basket with her favorite foods, spread a blanket on the soft grass. Samuel crawled around exploring while they ate, and the afternoon sun filtered through the leaves in dappled patterns. After they ate, Zachary got down on one knee and pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold band with a small garnet stone. "This was my mother's," he said. "The only thing of value she owned. I have carried it with me for years, thinking I would never use it after Mary died. But I would be honored if you would wear it, Georgia. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Georgia said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Zachary slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. He kissed her deeply, and Samuel chose that moment to crawl over and pull himself up on Zachary's leg, babbling happily. They both laughed, including the baby in their embrace, a family bound by love rather than blood. They were married in early July in a small ceremony at the ranch. Marcus Whitley stood up for Zachary, and they had invited a few neighbors who had proven themselves friendly over the past months. Georgia wore a new dress in pale yellow that Zachary had ordered from a catalog, and she carried a bouquet of prairie flowers. Zachary wore his best suit, cleaned and pressed, his hair neatly combed. A traveling preacher performed the ceremony on the porch of the cabin, with Samuel on Georgia's hip throughout. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Zachary kissed Georgia with such joy and tenderness that several of the guests wiped away tears. The wedding supper was simple but festive, and afterward the neighbors departed, leaving the new family alone. Zachary carried Samuel inside and put him to bed, singing softly until the baby's eyes closed. Then he returned to Georgia, who waited nervously by the fire. "You are my wife," he said, wonder in his voice. "And you are my husband," Georgia replied. "Finally and truly." Zachary took her hand and led her to the bedroom, the room she had occupied alone for so many months. Tonight they would share it as husband and wife. He closed the door gently and turned to face her. "I want a night to be perfect for you," he said. "Tell me what you need." Georgia stepped close and placed her hands on his chest. "I need you," she said simply. "I need to be your wife in every way." Their wedding night was tender and passionate, months of longing finally finding release. Zachary was gentle and attentive, making sure Georgia felt cherished and desired. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, and Georgia felt a completeness she had never experienced before. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Zachary replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Forever, Georgia, I promise you forever." Life settled into a new rhythm as summer deepened. Georgia and Zachary worked side by side during the days, expanding the garden, tending the cattle, making improvements to the cabin. At night, they fell into bed exhausted and happy, wrapped in each other's arms. Samuel thrived, growing strong and healthy, his personality emerging more each day. He was a happy child, quick to smile, curious about everything. In August, Georgia discovered she was pregnant again. The realization came with a flutter of nervousness. It had not been quite a year since Samuel's birth, and she worried about managing two babies so close in age. But when she told Zachary, his face lit up with such pure joy that her fears melted away. "Another baby," he breathed, pulling her into a tight embrace. "Georgia, that is wonderful news. You are not worried it is too soon?" she asked. "Not at all," Zachary said. "We will manage. We managed Samuel, and we will manage this baby too. Besides," he added with a grin, "I have always wanted a big family." "How big?" Georgia asked, amused. "4 or 5 children at least," Zachary said. "Enough to fill this house with noise and laughter." Georgia laughed. "We will need more rooms then." "Then we will build them," Zachary promised. "We will build whatever we need to hold our family." True to his word, Zachary began construction on an addition to the cabin. With the help of neighbors who were repaying various favors, he added 2 new bedrooms and expanded the main living area. The work took months, progressing through the fall and into the early winter, but by the time snow fell again, the new rooms were complete. Samuel celebrated his first birthday in December with a small party. He toddled around on unsteady legs, delighting in his newfound mobility, and smashed his fist into a cake Georgia had made special for the occasion. Zachary watched his son with undisguised adoration, lifting the sticky baby high into the air and making him giggle. "He has your eyes," Georgia observed, watching them together. "He has your smile," Zachary countered, "and your stubbornness." "I am not stubborn," Georgia protested. "Yes, you are," Zachary said, laughing. "And I love you for it." Georgia's second pregnancy was easier than her first, perhaps because she was not dealing with the stress and fear that had accompanied Samuel's gestation. She was healthy and happy, working alongside Zachary as much as her growing belly allowed. They had hired a young man named Peter to help with the heavier ranch work, giving Zachary more time to spend with his family. In March, as the prairie began to green again, Georgia went into labor. This time there was no fear, no uncertainty. They had sent for a midwife from a neighboring ranch, and she arrived in time to assist with the delivery. Zachary stayed by Georgia's side throughout, holding her hand, encouraging her. The baby arrived quickly, much faster than Samuel's birth had been. Georgia pushed only a handful of times before their daughter slipped into the world, wailing lustily. The midwife cleaned her and wrapped her in a soft blanket, then placed her in Georgia's arms. "A girl," Georgia said, tears streaming down her face. "Zachary, we have a daughter." Zachary looked at his daughter with awe. She had a cap of dark hair like her brother and her mother's delicate features. "She is perfect," he said hoarsely. "What should we name her?" Georgia had thought about this. "Mary," she said softly, "after your first love. She was part of what brought you here, part of what made you the man you are." Zachary's eyes filled with tears. "Are you certain? I do not want you to feel you are second." "I do not," Georgia said firmly. "I know you loved Mary, and I honor that. But I also know you love me now and our life together. Naming our daughter after her seems right." "Mary Hale," Zachary said, testing the name. He leaned down and kissed his daughter's forehead. "Welcome home, little Mary." With 2 young children, life became busier but also richer. Samuel was a doting big brother, constantly wanting to hold and help with the baby. Georgia managed the household with competent efficiency, and Zachary continued to prove himself an involved and loving father. He helped with nighttime feedings, changed diapers without complaint, and could often be found reading to both children even though Mary was far too young to understand. The ranch prospered. Word had spread about Zachary's integrity and fair dealing, and he had no trouble selling his cattle for good prices. He expanded the herd, bought more land, built a proper barn. George's garden flourished, providing more than enough vegetables for the family with surplus to sell in town. Their relationship with Yankton remained complicated. Some townspeople had softened toward them, especially as time passed, and it became clear that Zachary and Georgia had built a solid, respectable life. But others, including William Monroe, who had remained in the area, never quite forgave the scandal. Georgia learned to hold her head high, to ignore the whispers and stares. She had nothing to be ashamed of. 2 years after Mary's birth, Georgia gave birth to twin boys. Daniel and David arrived during a thunderstorm in May, arriving so quickly that Zachary barely had time to fetch the midwife. The boys were identical, with Zachary's dark hair and strong features. Managing 4 children under the age of 4 was exhausting, but Georgia and Zachary worked as a team, dividing responsibilities and supporting each other. "Remember when you said you wanted a big family?" Georgia asked Zachary one evening as they surveyed their 4 sleeping children. "I remember," Zachary said, grinning. "Are you complaining?" "Not at all," Georgia said. "But perhaps we could slow down for a year or 2. Give me time to recover." "Deal," Zachary said, pulling her into his arms. "Though I have to say, you are incredibly beautiful with a baby in your arms." "Flatterer," Georgia said, but she was smiling. Life continued its rhythm through the changing seasons. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved helping his father with the ranch work. Mary was sweet-natured and gentle, content to sit with her mother and play with dolls Georgia had made from scraps of fabric. The twins were mischievous and inseparable, constantly getting into trouble and making everyone laugh. Georgia watched her children grow with a heart full of gratitude. She thought often of that terrible day when William had cast her out, of how desperate and alone she had felt. If someone had told her then that she would end up here, in this life filled with love and laughter, she would not have believed them. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary asked one summer evening as they sat on the porch watching the children play in the yard. "About how much my life has changed," Georgia said. "About how lucky I am." "I am the lucky one," Zachary insisted. "You gave me a reason to live again, Georgia. You and Samuel and all these children. Before you came, I was just going through the motions. Now every day feels like a gift." "We are both lucky then," Georgia said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Lucky to have found each other." The years passed, marked by small joys and occasional challenges. There were hard winters and hot summers, years when the cattle prices were low and they had to tighten their belts, seasons when illness swept through and they nursed sick children with worried hearts. But through it all, Zachary and Georgia faced everything together, their partnership deepening with each passing year. Samuel grew into a responsible young man who took pride in working the ranch alongside his father. Mary became a talented seamstress and helped her mother with the younger children. The twins, now rambunctious boys of 8, kept everyone on their toes with their pranks and energy. Georgia had kept her promise and paused after the twins, giving her body time to recover. But in her late 30s, she found herself pregnant one more time. This baby, another boy they named Elijah, was her last. He was a surprise but a welcome one, a gentle soul who completed their family. When Samuel turned 18, he took over more of the ranch management, working in partnership with Zachary. Mary, at 16, had attracted the attention of a young man from a neighboring ranch, and Georgia found herself preparing for her first wedding. The twins talked endlessly about wanting to explore beyond the prairie, perhaps traveling to California or Oregon. One evening, as Georgia and Zachary sat on the porch watching yet another prairie sunset, Zachary took her hand. They were both in their mid-40s now, their hair touched with gray, their faces lined with the marks of hard work and honest living. "You remember the day I found you on the road?" Zachary asked. "Every detail," Georgia replied. "I remember thinking I had reached the end of everything. Instead, it was the beginning." "I knew that day," Zachary said. "When I saw you standing there, alone and pregnant and refusing to give up, I knew you were special. I did not know I would love you, did not know we would build this life together, but I knew I had to help you." "Your baby will have my protection," Georgia quoted softly. "That was what you promised, but you gave us so much more than protection. You gave us a family, a home, a life worth living." "We built it together," Zachary corrected. "Every bit of this we did together." Georgia looked out at their land, at the expanded cabin that now held 7 people comfortably, at the prosperous ranch they had built from nothing. She thought of their children, healthy and happy and secure in their parents' love. She thought of the community they had become part of, the neighbors who had become friends, the life they had carved out of the wild Dakota prairie. "I love you," she said to Zachary, "more now than ever." "And I love you," Zachary replied. "Forever and always, my Georgia." As the sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, they sat together in comfortable silence. Inside the house, their children's voices rose in laughter and argument and song. It was the sound of home, of family, of a life well lived. Georgia thought back to that frightened young woman who had been cast out alone, pregnant and desperate. She sent a silent thank you to that woman for her courage, for refusing to give up even when everything seemed hopeless. Because of her strength, this life had been possible. And she sent a thank you to the cowboy who had stopped on the road that September evening so long ago, who had seen a woman in need and offered help without hesitation. Zachary had kept his promise. He had protected her baby, had protected all her babies. But more than that, he had loved them, had made them his own, had built a family that would endure long after they were gone. The prairie wind blew soft and warm, carrying the scent of grass and cattle and home. Georgia squeezed Zachary's hand and he squeezed back, a silent conversation that needed no words. They had found each other in the wilderness, 2 broken people made whole by love and dedication. Together, they had created something beautiful, something lasting. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Samuel came out onto the porch. He was a young man now, tall and strong like his adopted father, with George's gentle eyes. "The twins are fighting again," he reported with a grin. "And Mary says if you do not come settle them, she is going to lock them in the barn." Georgia laughed and rose from her chair. "I suppose we should go restore peace." Zachary stood as well, slipping his arm around her waist. Another exciting evening in the Hale household. They went inside together, leaving the porch empty but warm with the love that had been built there over nearly 2 decades. The cabin was full of noise and chaos, children arguing and laughing, but it was the chaos of a happy home, a family that loved deeply and lived fully. Later that night, after the children had been settled and the house had grown quiet, Georgia and Zachary lay in their bed, wrapped in each other's arms. This bed had seen so much over the years. It had witnessed their wedding night, had held Georgia through 5 labors, had been their sanctuary through hard times and good. "You ever think about what might have been?" Georgia asked quietly. "If William had not cast me out, if you had not been on that road that evening?" "Sometimes," Zachary admitted. "But only to be grateful things worked out as they did. I cannot imagine my life without you, without our children. Even if it meant avoiding pain, I would not change a single thing because it brought me here to you." "I feel the same," Georgia said. She tilted her face up to kiss him, a kiss that was tender and familiar and still held the spark of passion even after all these years. "You saved me, Zachary, in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Zachary corrected gently. "You gave me a reason to love again, to hope again. You and Samuel walked into my life when I had given up on happiness. You are my second chance, Georgia, my miracle." Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly under the stars, wild and beautiful and full of promise. Inside, the Hale family slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and protected. It had not been an easy road, but it had been worth every struggle, every sacrifice. Georgia drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, a smile on her face. She dreamed of the future, of grandchildren running through these rooms, of Samuel finding love of his own, of Mary's wedding, of the twins' adventures, of little Elijah growing up strong and true. She dreamed of growing old with Zachary, of watching the seasons turn, of sitting on that porch in their twilight years and remembering all they had built together. But mostly, she dreamed of love, the love that had saved her when she had nothing, the love that had built a family from scattered pieces, the love that would endure long after they were gone, passed down through generations as a testament to what two people could create when they chose hope over despair, trust over fear, and each other above all else. The prairie wind sang through the grass, a lullaby as old as the land itself, and in the cabin, the Hale family rested, safe in the shelter of the love that had brought them home. Their story was one of courage and redemption, of promises kept and faith rewarded. It was a story written in the language of the heart, and it would echo through the years as proof that even in the hardest times, even in the wilderness, love could bloom and flourish and create miracles. And so they lived, worked, loved, and grew together, a family forged not by blood but by choice, strengthened by hardship and sweetened by joy. The pregnant woman who had been cast out alone had found her place in the world, and the cowboy who had promised protection had given so much more. Together, they had written their own ending, one filled with hope and happiness and the unshakable certainty that they had found exactly where they belonged. The years continued to unfold, each season bringing its own rhythms and revelations. Georgia and Zachary aged gracefully together, their love deepening with the passage of time. They watched with pride as their children grew into capable, loving adults who carried forward the values they had been taught. Samuel married a kind woman named Elizabeth from a neighboring ranch, and they built a home on the far side of the Hale property. His first child, a daughter, was named Georgia after her grandmother, and when Zachary held his granddaughter for the first time, tears streamed down his weathered face. "The circle continues," he whispered to Georgia, who stood beside him with her own tears falling. Mary's wedding was a beautiful affair, held on the ranch under the open sky. She married her sweetheart, a hard-working young man who reminded Georgia so much of Zachary at that age. The reception lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and laughter. Georgia watched her daughter waltz with her new husband and remembered her own wedding day, simple but perfect, the beginning of everything good in her life. The twins eventually did go exploring, spending 2 years traveling west before returning home with wild stories and a new appreciation for the prairie. They settled back in Yankton, one becoming a blacksmith and the other a carpenter, both finding wives and starting families. They remained as close as adults as they had been as children, their homes side by side on the edge of town. Young Elijah surprised everyone by developing a passion for books and learning. He spent hours in his mother's company, reading everything he could find, and eventually he left for college back east. It was hard for Georgia to see him go, but she was immensely proud of his ambition. He wrote letters every week, keeping them connected despite the miles between. As their children established their own lives, Georgia and Zachary found themselves with time to simply enjoy each other's company. They took long rides across the prairie, just the two of them, talking about everything and nothing. They read aloud to each other in the evenings, as they had done in those early days when they were first falling in love. They held hands and watched sunsets and marveled at how quickly the years had passed. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Zachary surprised Georgia with a gift. He led her outside to find a beautiful wooden swing hanging from the sturdy branch of a cottonwood tree near the house. He had carved their initials and the date they met into the seat, ZH and GM, September 1873. "So we never forget where we started," he explained, helping her sit down on the swing. He stood behind her and pushed gently, sending her gliding through the air. Georgia laughed with pure delight, feeling like a girl again despite her 40 years. "As if I could ever forget," she said when the swing slowed. She twisted to look at him over her shoulder. "Every day I wake up next to you, I remember how lucky I am." "The luck was all mine," Zachary insisted, as he had countless times over the years. It had become their loving argument. One neither would ever win because both believed they had gotten the better end of the deal. Life was not without its challenges. They faced droughts that tested their resolve, harsh winters that took a toll on the cattle, illnesses that frightened them with their severity. There were moments of fear and frustration, times when they questioned their decisions or worried about their children. But they faced everything together, drawing strength from their partnership. When Georgia turned 50, Zachary threw her a surprise party. The entire family gathered, along with friends from across the region. The house overflowed with people and noise and love. Grandchildren ran through the rooms that had once held their parents, and Georgia stood in the center of it all, overwhelmed by the realization of how much had grown from that single moment of kindness on a dusty road. Samuel stood to make a toast, raising his glass high. "To my mother," he began, his voice strong and clear, "who taught me that strength comes in many forms, that courage is not the absence of fear but the decision to move forward despite it. And to my father," he continued, looking at Zachary, "who showed me that family is not defined by blood but by love, by the choice to stand beside someone no matter what comes. You two gave us the greatest gift parents can give their children, the example of what true love looks like." The room erupted in cheers and applause. Georgia found she could not speak around the lump in her throat, so she simply smiled through her tears and raised her own glass in acknowledgement. Zachary slipped his arm around her waist and held her close, and she leaned into him, grateful beyond words for this life they had built. As the party continued around them, Zachary leaned down to whisper in her ear, "When I made that promise all those years ago, when I told you your baby would have my protection, I had no idea how much you would both protect me in return. You saved me from a half-life, Georgia. You made me whole." "We made each other whole," Georgia replied, echoing words they had spoken many times over the years. It was the truth they had learned together. That love was not about one person rescuing another, but about two people choosing to build something together, brick by brick, day by day, until they had created a foundation strong enough to weather any storm. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and Georgia and Zachary settled into the comfortable rhythm of their later years. They reduced the size of the herd, letting Samuel take on more of the ranch operations. They spent more time in their garden, growing vegetables and flowers with patient hands. They welcomed more grandchildren, each one a blessing, each one carrying forward the legacy of love that had started on that September evening so long ago. On quiet nights, they would sit on their porch swing, gently rocking as stars appeared overhead. Sometimes they talked, sharing memories or discussing their grandchildren's latest antics. Sometimes they simply sat in companionable silence, hands clasped, content in each other's presence. "Do you remember the first time you saw the prairie?" Zachary asked one evening. "I was too frightened to appreciate it," Georgia admitted. "I saw only emptiness and danger, but you taught me to see the beauty, the endless possibility. Now I cannot imagine living anywhere else." "It is beautiful," Zachary agreed. "But it is beautiful because you are here. You turned this lonely place into a home, Georgia. You filled it with life and love." As they aged into their 60s, both Georgia and Zachary's health began to show the marks of their hard-working lives. Zachary's joints ached on cold mornings, and Georgia tired more easily than she once had. But they adapted, helping each other through the challenges, still finding joy in the simple pleasures of each day. Elijah returned from college with a law degree and set up practice in Yankton. He visited the ranch every Sunday for dinner, bringing his parents news from town and regaling them with stories from his cases. He had not married yet, claiming he was too busy building his career, but Georgia saw the way he looked at the schoolteacher who sometimes accompanied him, and she suspected a wedding announcement was not far off. On a crisp October day, as golden leaves drifted from the cottonwoods and the air held the first hint of winter's chill, Georgia and Zachary celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. Their children organized another gathering, though this one was quieter, more intimate. The family gathered for a special dinner, and afterward, as the younger generations entertained themselves, Georgia and Zachary slipped away to their favorite spot by the creek. They walked slowly, arm in arm, following the path they had walked countless times over the years. The creek burbled over smooth stones and the cottonwoods whispered in the breeze. When they reached their destination, Zachary helped Georgia sit on the blanket he had brought, then lowered himself beside her with a small grunt. "Getting old," he said with a rueful smile. "We are getting old together," Georgia corrected. "That was always the plan." They sat quietly for a while, watching the water flow past, listening to the sounds of the prairie around them. Finally, Zachary spoke. "I have been thinking about that day we met," he said. "How impossibly young we were, how little we knew about what life had in store. If I could go back and talk to that 25-year-old cowboy, I would tell him that offering you shelter was the best decision he would ever make." "And if I could talk to that frightened pregnant woman," Georgia said, "I would tell her to trust in the kindness of strangers, because sometimes miracles come disguised as dusty cowboys on paint horses." Zachary laughed, then sobered. "I want you to know," he said carefully, "that I have no regrets, not one. Every moment, every year, every challenge and joy, I would choose it all again if it meant ending up here with you." "I know," Georgia said softly. "I feel the same way. You gave me a life I never dreamed possible, Zachary. You kept your promise to protect my baby, and you gave us so much more. You gave us a family, a home, a love that will echo through generations." "Samuel was never just your baby," Zachary said. "From the moment he was born, he was ours. They all are. Our children, our grandchildren, the family we built together. That is my legacy, Georgia, not the ranch or the land, but the love we created and passed on." "It is a good legacy," Georgia agreed. She rested her head on his shoulder, and they sat together as the afternoon light shifted toward evening. They had lived a full life, rich with purpose and meaning. Whatever years remained to them, they would face together, just as they had faced everything else. The sun began to set, painting the prairie sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold and pink. It was the same sky that had stretched above them on that first evening when Zachary had found Georgia on the road. The same endless expanse that had witnessed their journey from strangers to partners to lovers to companions growing old together. "Thank you," Georgia whispered, not sure herself what she was thanking him for stopping that day, for offering shelter, for loving her, for building this life with her, for all of it, she supposed, for everything. "Thank you," Zachary replied, understanding perfectly. He kissed the top of her head and held her close as the stars began to appear overhead. The same stars that had watched over them for 3 decades of marriage and all the years before. They made their way back to the house eventually, walking slowly in the gathering darkness, still arm in arm as they had always been. Inside, their family waited, multiple generations gathered under one roof, and the sound of laughter and conversation spilled out into the night. Georgia paused on the porch and looked back at the prairie stretching away into the darkness. Somewhere out there was the road where she had stood alone and desperate, where Zachary had found her and changed both their lives forever. That road had led here to this moment, to this full and beautiful life. "Ready?" Zachary asked, holding the door open. "Always," Georgia replied, stepping inside with her husband, coming home as she had done every day for 3 decades, grateful for the love that had saved her and the family that love had created. The door closed behind them, and the prairie night settled around the Hale homestead, peaceful and serene. Inside, the family gathered, telling stories and making memories, bound together by the unbreakable threads of love and loyalty that Georgia and Zachary had woven so many years ago. Their story was complete, a circle that had started with a desperate woman and a compassionate cowboy and had expanded to encompass generations. It was a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of commitment, and the transformative nature of love freely given. And as Georgia and Zachary settled into their chairs by the fire, surrounded by the fruits of their life together, they knew with absolute certainty that they had found exactly what they were meant to find in each other. 2 souls who had met in darkness and had built a light bright enough to guide their family for generations to come. It was, in every way that mattered, a perfect ending to a story that had begun with a simple promise: "Your baby will have my protection." A promise that had been kept, exceeded, and transformed into something far more beautiful than either of them could have imagined. This was their legacy, their gift to the future, and it was good.